Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The man pictured here on the left, Edmund Rice, numbered among a relatively small group of Union volunteers who distinguished themselves in combat during the Civil War and then went on to long careers in the United States Regular Army. Rice was a Massachusetts native, educated at Norwich University, went on to serve shortly as a merchant ship captain's apprentice, and then became a civil engineer. That was at the beginning of hostilities. Rice began his Army services volunteer service as a captain, a company captain in the Bay State's 14th Infantry, soon transferred to the 19th Massachusetts Infantry, where he worked his way to lieutenant colonel. During this time, during those 4 years of war, he suffered battle wounds at Gettysburg, at Antietam, Spotsylvania. He fell into enemy hands once. He led his command, all the way through Appomattox. He continued on in the regular army during the Indian War period, reportedly offering to lead troops to vindicate the deaths of George Armstrong Custer and his men at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He also patented several improvements in military equipment. He went on to serve in the Spanish American War and the Philippine conflict, where a fellow Civil War veteran, President William McKinley, appointed Rice senior colonel of all U.S. volunteers in the Philippines. Rice ended his career as a brigadier general in 1903. Upon his death 3 years later, in 1906, and his burial at Arlington National Cemetery, he left a rich legacy that included the Medal of Honor for his actions in participating in the repulse of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. One admirer wrote, "To the daring leadership and magnificent courage of Lieutenant Colonel Rice in that crisis, much credit is due for the great success of the movement." With the cry of "Follow me, boys," he dashed forward into the advance of the enemy, fighting with indomitable courage, and fell, desperately wounded, inside the lines of the enemy, without doubt the leading man in blue who penetrated and fell within Pickett's advance. Rice also left behind a number of portrait photographs capturing him at various points during his life. One of them is here, a large format albumin print showing Rice on the left casually posed with his fellow officers. Though the photographer is not identified, a similar view in the carte de visite format bears an attribution to photographer Michael Witt of Columbus, Ohio. The pose in this image is unique for a Civil War era studio portrait. Rice and his comrades, all officers based upon their signatures, are casually posed, lounging on the studio floor with a simple canvas backdrop. The men are all dressed in what appears to be fresh uniforms and caps, shoes with soles that show little, if any, use, haversacks looking brand new with shiny rainproof material, and a canteen. The content prompts a few questions. Why are these nicely dressed men posed with walking sticks? And those walking sticks are pretty beat looking. Why are these officers not carrying swords? They're officers, by the way. Where are the shoulder straps denoting the rank of these officers? And why isn't Rice dressed in the double breasted frock coat that is consistent with his rank? Maybe the largest question, why are they posed together? How is Rice, a New England soldier, connected to Michiganders Captain Delos Phillips and First Lieutenant Benjamin Delos Safford of the 17th Michigan Infantry and Second Lieutenant Harrison Berdan of the 5th Michigan Cavalry? There's more questions than answers, that's for sure. Well, a short trip down the research rabbit hole reveals the connection, the reason that these four men are all posed together. It's the May 12th, 1864 Battle of Spotsylvania. The regimental history of the 19th Massachusetts tells part of the story of the brutal fighting at the Bloody Angle, also known as the Mule Shoe Salient. I want to share an excerpt with you, and it begins on the evening of May 11th. It was a dark, dreary night, the story goes, and we fell over stumps and fallen trees as we moved to the left. At 4 o'clock in the morning of the 12th, we formed in line. Our orders were to give commands in whispers, have dippers so hung that they would not rattle against bayonets, and move forward. We were soon in front of the rebel works, which were protected by a battis. We tore these aside and passed on. One regiment, forgetting the orders, gave a cheer, and the rebels were aroused. Yet over the works we went, and the fiercest hand to hand fight of the war ensued. We captured General Bushrod Johnson and his entire division, including 22 pieces of artillery and 17 stands of colors. The woods were so thick that in advancing our lines, it became broken. When we reached a clearing, the only officers in sight were Colonel Rice, Lieutenant Thompson, and myself. Where are the colors? Said Colonel Rice. We could not answer the question. At that moment, we saw several hundred rebels running back to their lines. Colonel Rice said, I see a Massachusetts color and we'll go after it. You and Lieutenant Thompson try to capture those rebels. Hastily gathering men from nearly every regiment in the Corps, we threw forward a skirmish line and captured nearly 400 prisoners. After turning them over to the provost guard, we returned to the line, found the colors, but the Colonel Rice, was not there. And the rest of the day we fought where we could get a chance. The regimental history goes on to describe the action during the rest of the day without Rice, who, they surmised, must have been captured as they did not find his body anywhere on the battleground. Rice, in fact, had suffered a minor wound, and as they surmised, he did fall into enemy hands. That happened at some point after he set off to find the regimental colors that turned up being found by others in his regiment. 11 days after the battle, on the evening of May 23rd, Rice and 5 other prisoners jumped from a moving train car and disappeared into the night. 4 of the men, Rice, Phillips, Safford, and Burdan, all of the men pictured here, made it to Union lines. In a report published in the Boston Journal on June 27th, 1864, and reprinted in other newspapers, Rice tells the story of what happened. I want to read the report to you. It's titled Successful Escape. Story begins. Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Rice of the Massachusetts 19th Regiment, whose capture by the rebels at Spotsylvania Courthouse and subsequent escape from the rebels have been mentioned in our columns, reached Boston on Saturday evening in good health and spirits. He has given the following particulars of the escape of himself and his comrades. They were in a boxcar about 30 miles from Danville, in Virginia. There were 6 in the party. In one of the doors stood the guard who had them in charge. The other door was a slat door. The escape was made on the evening of the 23rd of May. They got a number of their fellow prisoners to stand up between them and their guard while they quietly cut off 3 of the slats of the door, and through the aperture, thus made 6 of them lowered themselves out of the car, which was going at the rate of 15 miles an hour. They were not injured in landing, but managed to get away to the swamps. One of their number could not be found, and it is not known what his fate was. Now they're down to 5. After getting clear of the cars, they took to the swamps and kept in them and in the mountains 27 days before they reached our lines, remaining concealed during the day and traveling in the night. They were advertised in the Richmond papers, and a large reward was offered for them. In one case, nearly every man in the country turned out in search of them and hunted them with hounds, but without success. While lying concealed in a piece of brush, they could hear their pursuers giving orders to spread out, and at another, heard them firing into a piece of woods in which it was thought they might be concealed. After they had been out 15 days, they were retaken by two rebel soldiers, but they watched their opportunity, seized their captors, and spared them only on their promise they would not inform about them for 4 days. Colonel Rice thinks they faithfully kept their promise. After a great deal of suffering and exhaustion, they succeeded in entering the Union lines at Somerville, West Virginia, whence they were forwarded to Columbus, Ohio, where, by orders from the War Department, they were furnished with clothing, advance pay, and had a furlough of 80 days granted them. The names of those who escaped were Lieutenant Colonel Edmund Rice, 19th Massachusetts Regiment, Captain Delos Phillips, 17th Michigan, First Lieutenant Benjamin D. Stafford, 17th Michigan, Second Lieutenant Harrison Burdan, 5th Michigan Cavalry, First Lieutenant C.W.D. Smithley, 5th West Virginia Cavalry. Lieutenant Smithley was recaptured the second day out. So there's your four. Note also the reference to Columbus, Ohio, which is the same location where this image was made based on that attribution to another surviving photograph. So there you have the basics of the story. We now know why they posed for this image. It's fairly easy to connect the details that were revealed in the telling of the story by Rice and published in the Boston Journal to this exact image. They have new clothes on given them by the War Department, which, of course, getting probably standard issue material, not for officers. They have jackets that were issued most usually to privates and non commissioned officers. They held on to their walking sticks as a memento of their journey. I'm sure their clothes were beyond saving, which explains why they're not in the picture. And of course, the four signatures around the edges of the image match the names in the newspaper report. As you can see, Rice is on the left and Burdan is on the right. By the way, Harrison Burdan is the brother of Hiram Burdan, of the Burdan sharpshooters. And then I believe the two signatures on the bottom relate to the men in the center left and the center right. Center left is Safford, center right is Phillips. So, what happened to these men? The former prisoners returned to their commands after the conclusion of their furloughs. You know Rice's journey. I told it to you at the beginning of this video. But what about the fellow escapees? The Michigan men, they all survived the war. Delos Phillips of the 17th Michigan mustered out of the regiment in October 1864 and lived about another 20 years, dying in Ypsilanti in 1887. Second Lieutenant Harrison Burdan, as I mentioned, he was actually the half brother of Hiram Burdan, ended his service as a captain and lived until 1923. And First Lieutenant Benjamin Delos Safford of the 17th Michigan, he advanced to captain and ended the war with the brevet rank of major, settling in Detroit after the war and dying in 1920. So there you have the story behind this unique photograph. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.